Morning. You've read the title, you know what you're here for, cue the intro. Okay, so we're back once again for the Peugeot partner engine, and we'll have a little quick catch up as to where we're at, and then we'll talk about what we're working on today. So when we left off last episode, we'd just done the valve clearances, we've chucked the 9mm pump back on, and we've done the thermostat housing as well as the oil breather and oil filter setup. Previous to that, she's also got 16 valve rods in and a fresh head gasket. But now we need to do the final preparation in order to get this engine timed up. So there's a couple of bits and pieces still left to do before we can start looking at putting the Cambelt on, and they are as follows. So we've got the camshaft seal still to go back in at the top here. We've got part of the engine mount system which also retains the inside of the tensioner, and then of course we've got the water pump to go back in. So nothing too taxing, but then on top of that, to be able to time her up correctly, we have to get a flywheel back on. So the main reason for getting the flywheel back on is because your timing peg hole, which is hidden down here, locks into the back of the flywheel. So without that, we can't time nothing up. Now, I've seen a lot of people struggle with Cambelts in the past. It's not the installation of them, which is the hard bit. It's actually getting them to run true and straight. So I'm just going to have a quick talk over a few basics to actually look at in order to get your Cambelt running dead straight along your pulleys. So there is a couple of variables on these pulley systems which will actually dictate just how straight it runs. Now, never fear, these do usually ride to one side, and you'll find that they come right to the edge of usually the pump pulley. A lot of people get scared about that, but if it starts wandering beyond, then you need to start addressing things. So plain and simple, most of it comes down to, and you'll laugh, it's actually the water pump. So people always get tempted to put a little bit of gasket paste in with the water pump. It actually sets the pump sometimes unevenly and to one side, so that will cause the belt to track over slightly. The other thing is as well is, like with these mountains and stuff like that, you've just got to clear all this surface rust off. I'm not saying about going full ham with a bit of sandpaper, but it will pay dividends just to literally get a knife, Stanley blade, and as we did with the deck surface, just scratch it along until you can feel it goes completely over the surface and doesn't snag up. So enough talking, let's crack on again. Okay, so as we just saw in that time lapse, I started struggling with this engine mount. So for some reason, the relationship in between the holes, there's 3 holes what hold into the cast iron block, and there's 1 hole what holds into the cylinder head. The cylinder head one is doweled, so that should be the dictating position. But the relationship between everything there has slightly changed somehow. Not quite sure what it is, can't really be the thickness of the head gasket or anything, but I'm left with my only option really to overcome this is to slightly open out the holes on the engine mount. Now, it's less than ideal and it's not the correct way to really do it in this situation, but having a look at it, and I've just had a look off camera, I really cannot work out what has changed in the relationship wise between all those mounting holes. So the only thing I can think is maybe that the alley has partially distorted, but if I try and rely on pulling purely on the bolts and the single one in the alley head, I'm going to end up stripping one of the threads. So unfortunately I'm going to have to clearance it in this one time. Don't approve of this method at all, and I wouldn't advise it, but genuinely, unless the alley casting mount is warped when I've hot washed it, I can't see what the actual problem here is. So I'm going to clearance 1 hole at a time. The hole I think is the worst one out is this one here, the lower one, with the stud for the Cambelt plastics. So I'll start off by clearancing that hole first, and I'll fettle it backwards and forwards and see just what I can get away with. Right, so lucky enough, I had a quick look on the other engine and I just had a ponder on it before I started cracking the drill bits out. And I'm glad I did, because I've just proved we're all human, we can all make mistakes. And the mistake I made was I forgot to put the idle pulley. So the idle pulley actually mounts up underneath the engine mount. Completely forgot about it. We're all human here, we all make mistakes. Luckily, mine hasn't cost me anything. So, let's get back on with the time lapse. I'm unstoppable. Okay, well, that's now sorted. So, we've got most of the auxiliary bits now back on. The only thing left on top of all this is the tensioner itself. So there's like a spring and a bucket, or a spring and a plunger, which pushes down and applies constant pressure to the tensioner. It's also a form of sort of fail-safe. It should be like an auto setup system, so while the bolts are loose, the spring should actually apply just enough force to get that cambelt tension just to where it should be. Now, over time, you've got to remember the springs lose strength, they're subjected to heat cycles and stuff like that. You can't really trust that auto tension system that much anymore. I mean, with the auto tension system as well, the other thing is that when you do it up, obviously it then overrides the spring, so you're locking it in place. But when it comes down to it, all I like to do is just apply a little bit more pressure, and I will show you when we get to that point later on. So just as a quick rundown on that tension system. So that's the spring, that's the plunger, that hides up inside of here. So that goes up in there, and then when we put the tensioner on, pivots on that point there, locks off on a back bolt on this slider here, which is this one, and then the end of the arm, that is pushed on by the plunger there. So I have heard of people losing these springs and plungers as well, or then just not being present, and to be honest, they're not overly needed, so I'll show you what to check for later on. We're now at the point of pretty much getting the cambelt on. So I've got all the auxiliaries on the side here. I've got my 2 bolts just here to lock the pump pulley off in the correct position. I've got my one in the top for the cam, and I've just put the flywheel on, which is why she's on the engine crane. And I've got my one locking pin back here for the flywheel, and yes, it's an Allen key, but it works. So that would be the timing locked off. So just as a reminder, 1 bolt in the top of the cam, 2 bolts in the pump, 1 in the locking position for the flywheel. Job's a good one. Chuck the cambelt on, and we should be able to set the tension. Now, while I'm here near the flywheel, I feel like I need to talk about this. So, to get the RPM counter to work properly on the Peugeot partner, now it can't use the normal D-turbo flywheel, which usually has the sensor in the back here. It needs the same pickup sensor on the top of the gearbox as what that runs. If not, the clocks don't work. I can't remember what the 2 sensor types are called. I think it's Hall and VR, and I cannot remember which way round it is. I'm pretty certain I think it's VR is on the ECU for the Peugeot partner. But either way, if you want the RPM counter to work, you need to use the original Peugeot partner sensor. Now, D-turbo flywheel is not compatible with that sensor, so you need a different flywheel. And here be said different flywheel. So, as we can see, this has got the wings on it, which means it will pick up and is compatible with the Peugeot partner sensor. However, and this is where things start getting complicated. So this flywheel is off a Citroen Evasion, which means we need to then run the Citroen Evasion clutch. Right, now you'll have to try and stay with me here. So the Citroen Evasion clutch. So we've got the Citroen Evasion pressure plate. Now, if you compare this to a D-Turbo one, you can see it does not have the integrated bearing. It is indeed a push style of clutch. So, we have this release bearing. Now, I believe this release bearing to be the same fitment as the ones on the 2 litre HDI boxes, but I'm yet to test that theory. So, you then have two choices. So, your gearbox, you can either change the fork setup, which is the way I'm going to go because I prefer the ratios in the D-Turbo box. Or, I've got a 2 litre HDI box back there. I believe you can run a 2 litre HDI box, which already has the correct fork in it. Now, at the moment, I'm working on theory on this one because I haven't actually tested this in the fork. Now, if this is wrong, I think the next step is I will have to get a 2 litre HDI thrust bearing, which will actually fit the gearbox, and then use that on the Citroen Evasion pressure plate for the Citroen Evasion flywheel. Okay, so a few people might turn around and go, hold up, why aren't you using the typical XUD clutch? Now, typical XUD clutch is 215mm. When you go over to the Citroen Evasion flywheel, it's 230mm. So there's a difference there, fitment difference in the pressure plate as well. So we can't just run the other pressure plate. And that's where things start snowballing. So we've got the Citroen Evasion flywheel, which we know will work with the sensor for the van. And then we need the clutch. So the clutch is compatible with the flywheel. Then we have to find a way of releasing that clutch. Because it's a push type, your typical D-Turbo gearbox uses a pull type release bearing. So you've got two options. You can run the 2 litre HDI gearbox, or you can take the fork from the 2 litre HDI gearbox and put it in the D-Turbo box. That's my personal fan favourite because I don't like the ratios in the 2 litre HDI box. They're great if you're pushing big power or if you want the motorway, like mile per gallon out of them, the economy. But because I live on B roads and stuff like that, I want to be able to bash this and have some acceleration. And that's where that D-Turbo box comes in. So then, now, everything I've just said there, at the moment, it's all theory. It's still hanging on the crane, so don't take it for gospel. The only bit I'm concerned about is that release bearing. I've not tried that release bearing yet on the fork for the 2 litre HDI box. So if it doesn't fit, that then means I need to go out and try a 2 litre HDI release thrust bearing on this pressure plate to see if that actually fits and if that's the answer. So potentially that is how we get ourselves a working RPM counter. Now I'll quickly expand on that last bit as well. So the fun doesn't stop there. Because we're using 306 gearboxes, now I've not seen a 2 litre HDI box from a Citroen, Berlingo or Peugeot partner to know if it works and to know if I could just get one of those gearboxes. Got 306 one sit here. But, so 306 gearboxes, to then run them, you have to Frankenstein a couple of drive shafts. I know for definite, the long shaft, we've got to try and think now quickly, which one is the long shaft? Driver side. Driver side is the long shaft. So, the long shaft, to get that to work, because the lengths are different between Peugeot partner and 306, you then have to use the inner part of the shaft, so up to the support bearing and that first CV cup, and then you have to take the Peugeot partner shaft and swap the ends over. So you've got Frankenstein shafts. You need 2 drive shafts to then make one. And I'm not sure, I've heard mixed things about the passenger side, but the passenger side is actually just a direct fit into the diff. I don't know until I get there and try, but worst case scenario, that's another Frankenstein shaft you've got to make to get everything right. So it's not good, is it? There's a lot going on just to make this gearbox fit. So as if putting an engine in, well, the engine swap is probably the easier bit. My bit of advice, so because I'm dedicating myself to the 306 box and that's the way I want to go, the only thing I would give as a bit of advice to other people, rather than spending all this money on gearboxes, I'm lucky enough I've got them in stock and I can piss around with them. I would possibly go out, have a look at a proper 2 litre HDI box from a partner and see what the differences are, to see if you can actually just directly bolt one of them on and run OEM shafts. Because if that's the case, then you're laughing. And just to touch upon one final thing, for anyone who's turning around and saying, why don't we just run the DW8 flywheel and clutch? 200mm. 200mm clutch versus a 215. The extra 15mm doesn't sound like a lot, but if you like swapping clutches over when they start spinning and glazing up, be my guest. So, back to all of this. We've now got to chuck the Cambelt on. We know she's locked off, timing's pinned out and everything. So now it's just going to be a case of routing the belt on there. I did want to try and do this actually in a time lapse, but that's where I've been rigging my phone up on the engine crane. So unfortunately, I can't really rig it up. And of course, I've forgotten my phone holder again. So I'm going to go away, I'm going to chuck this on, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about that tensioner. Okay, so that's the Cambelt now fed on. Now we can see quite a bit of slack up there, whereas it's tight in other places. So we're going to have to come back and double check this in a second. I actually think, looking at that, I need to pull an extra tooth round there and then bring it up so I've got the slack here. So at the moment I've got the slack in the wrong place. So 2 seconds, I'll go away and correct that. So that should now be the slack in the correct place, which is here. And with any luck, what I was saying about this auto tension system, when we now release these 2 bolts, only just got to release them slightly, we should see the auto tensioner ping like that. So, just checking it. Seems like she's pretty much on, so I've got to push the Cambelt a little bit more on there. But what we're essentially looking for is when we come up top, this is the longest part of the Cambelt. Now there is proper tension and gauges and everything like that to check these with. What you need to be looking for is it should be a bit of a struggle to turn a 90 on it. That's how I've always set them, and I've never had an issue with it, and that's how I was always taught. So the longest part of the Cambelt, which is your top bit here, everywhere else is a short run. You should just be able to pull a 90 on it. Now, that isn't really resisting me, so I would say that still feels loose. So this is where I said these springs start to wear a little bit in the plunger. So all I'll do is, you can see the square there, I can put a socket in there and I can just add a little bit more preload onto it and then tighten these 2 bolts up. If you go too mad and you go too tight, you will hear this Cambelt hum at you. Literally, when you do the first start up, it will hum and it will make a horrible whirring sound, in which case you need to slacken it off slightly. But I've always stuck to the principle of a little bit of a struggle to pull a 90 there, and it's usually pretty good. So I'm going to go away quickly, I'm going to set that. I also, if we're just looking at where the belt is on the pulleys, I would like to start off by actually setting that in the centre. So I've got to push the belt over before tightening all the tensioners up and locking it in place. Right, and now you can see I've released all my timing pins, And the final test of this is do a few rotations. So I'm going to come back at the top here, and now we can actually see what I mean by it should just be a gentle struggle. So there we go. I can turn a 90, but I've got to put some bloody effort in it. So that is where I like to set these. So if we have a look at that, we can see there's not too much slack in there. And on the longest part, we are struggling to turn a 90. So that is where I like to have these Cambelt set. That's a personal preference. I'm not saying this is correct, by the way. So, release all the timing pins, turn the engine over, make sure pistons aren't going to make love to your valves. Once you've turned it over 2 or 3 times and you're happy with it, do one final check. Put all your timing pins back in again. Make sure that the timing will lock out exactly the same again. As long as you can repeat the lockout procedure as to how we put the Cambelt on, you know that your valves are not going to make love to your pistons. And that's all there is to it, basically. So yeah, once you've managed to do that, once you've got to that stage, it's a case of just chucking the Cambelt plastics back on. Not going to sit here and suck eggs with you guys. I've got things to get on with, and I need to finish her off. So yeah, that's Cambelt chat for the day. You've also got some additional information for the flywheel, clutch setup, and everything I'm going to be running to try and get the RPM counter working in that Peugeot partner. So bonus information for you guys too. But I'm going to call it a day there. I'm probably going to go away. I've got little bits and pieces to plod on with. I want to try and get the turbo on by the end of the day, but you guys don't really need to see that. It's as long as things go right, it's just going to be a standard turbo. So I think it's either a T2 or GT15 unit I've got sat down there. Really don't know. It depends on how much play the turbo's got in it. I've got a series of spare turbos sat there, but I don't know what's healthy, what isn't. Ideally, I want a GT15 on, so they always give the most response. That's the turbo I prefer. The only thing is they are made of bloody cheese, so nice bit of brie on the back of the block. They will ship themselves just for fun, but I'm not going to be turning it up to be greedy with the power, so I'll see what turbo I've got spare. My absolute worst case scenario is I do still have a spare GT20 set up, but I don't really want to go down that route. That's not what this engine's about or anything like that. So if I go down that route, Lord help me, I just think that will suck the reliability out of the van, to be honest. Not saying that the sedan was unreliable, because all I would keep it on is probably 18 psi, which was my running pressure with the top mount intercooler on the sedan, and she behaved astronomically like that. I ran it in for a year. Well, I think it actually extended to nearly a year and a half, 2 years. Ran it in like that. Didn't skip a beat at all. Had a 10mm pump on it as well. So considering would be a 9mm pump this time round, it would probably be as reliable as what the sedan was. But I just don't want to do it. I want to keep it on as many stock parts as possible. Just makes things easier later on to replace. Not only that, but making a downpipe for that GT20 is an absolute pain in the arse. But yeah, so that's where we're at. We've got the Cambelt on today. Talked you through clutch and flywheel. That's all you're getting out of me this video. So I'll see you later, guys. Give us a like and subscribe if you wouldn't mind. Yeah, give us some comments. If you want any more information, let me know what information you want, and we'll see what I can help you guys out with. But yeah, thank you for watching. Catch you later.